practices. We really cannot keep up. It's as if he goes on media benders with rallies and Fox interviews and tweets, but we're the ones who can barely stand up straight at the end of the day. So last weekend, several of the country's best-known newspapers tried to study a week of Trump's statements, and all the newsrooms concluded the same thing, that Trump lies more often than Hillary Clinton. Yes, lies. Politico, the New York Times, LA Times, they all used the L word. Trump's whoppers about Iraq and birtherism were a theme at Monday's debate as well. No wonder people doubted him when he complained that the microphone he was using was defective. Now, as it turns out, the debate commission said on Friday there were issues regarding Trump's audio that affected the sound level in the debate hall. It did not affect the TV broadcast, though. This weekend, Trump is taking a truth that there were audio issues and spinning it into a conspiracy theory, musing that the debate commission is rigged against him. Trump keeps telling his followers that every institution is rigged. First the commission, and all these other issues. Well, now even Google.
And a new post-debate poll that just came out, the Google poll, has us leading Hillary Clinton by 2 points nationwide. And that's despite the fact that Google's search engine was suppressing the bad news about Hillary Clinton. How about that? How about that?
In 22 seconds, there were at least two falsehoods. Number one, Google did not conduct a poll. Number two, Google's algorithm is not biased against him. Mr. Trump, just Google Hillary Clinton lies, and you'll see all the stories that Google is not suppressing. So let's dispel with one more Trump myth. In the wee hours of Friday morning, he tweeted his frustration with all the recent stories about his aides telling him to shape up and study for the next debate. He wrote this: "Anytime you see a story about me or my campaign saying sources said, do not believe it. There are no sources. They're just made-up lies." He says if we don't name our sources, our anonymous sources who insist on anonymity, the sources don't exist. This is untrue. It's flatly untrue. It's actually really troubling to say because CNN, the New York Times, all these news outlets have really important anonymous source policies where we have to tell our editors, tell our bosses who our sources are, even when they're Trump aides who are trying to communicate with Trump through news stories. Bottom line is these false claims by Trump have serious consequences. Back with me now to talk about it, John Avlon, a CNN political analyst, editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, and Tim Grant, executive editor of Newsbusters. Tim, I believe your position here is anonymous sources are not acceptable, are not appropriate to be using for stories?
Anonymous sources are for important information. When you have information you can't get any other way, what we see too often in political news media today, as I just suggested in the previous segment, is you use anonymous sources to say incredibly nasty things, often from political consultants who have clients they're trying to be friends of. Like, I can't say nasty things about the other Republicans because they might hire me later this year. What you're saying when you're a news source is, trust us, this person does not have an agenda. Well, when the newspaper or the network has a partisan agenda, then you're not going to tend to trust their anonymous sources either.
John, what do you make of Trump telling people not to believe the media? It's been a theme for 15 or 16 months ever since he entered the race, but it seems to be heightening in recent weeks.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, he's been very clear that attacking the media is a core strategy for his campaign. It's been expressed by surrogates like Newt Gingrich and expressed to other surrogates in particular. And Trump has a twisted relationship with the media, right? Because he simultaneously craves media attention and then attacks media when it attempts to hold him accountable, which is our job. Look, I think we also need to confront the fact that part of the reason that Trump's line of attack works for his supporters is that trust in media has been on the decline for decades. And that is a real problem. A prime culprit of that, I would argue, is the rise of partisan media, which allows people to segregate themselves into separate political realities. But that is a larger and different problem. It is deeply serious. It's the ground on which Trump's success with these line of attacks with his supporters run. But in the long run, it's about trying to diminish the idea of truth itself, and that is incredibly dangerous to democracy. You know my favorite quote from Daniel Patrick Moynihan: everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. And that's what's being intentionally muddled here by the Republican nominee.
On Monday, after the debate, Donald Trump praised Lester Holt. But later in the week, he had some pretty choice words for the moderator. Let's look at what he said later in the week.
Well, you know, when I first did it, I thought he was fine. I wasn't thinking about it. But when I reviewed it and when I saw all the commentary, because a lot of people thought he was terrible, and I looked at all of the commentary, I realized he was much, much tougher on me than he was on Hillary. It was like a day and night.
Tim, tell me why you think Trump is bringing this up repeatedly. Do you feel that working the refs is a smart strategy for him?
Working the refs is a terrible analogy. If Lester Holt was refereeing a football game, he would have gotten thrown out of the stadium. I think
Why?
the Saturday Night Live skit I would have done if I was running the show would be Lester Holt. It would sort of be like the end of Top Gun, where he lands on the flight deck after beating the Russians and everybody applauds him. Obviously, the whole news media spent before the debate was telling Lester, Truth Squad Trump, Truth Squad Trump, no Truth Squad Hillary. And he heard the lesson. And he obviously did this in a way that was completely one-sided. And
when
everyone
Donald Trump
knows
lies
it.
more than Clinton on the stage.
Correct. But the whole assumption of liberal media is Hillary somehow never lies. Right?
Who's
if you go to
saying that?
PolitiFact,
Who's saying that?
everybody cites PolitiFact and says Hillary never lies. The fact of the matter is, why is her trustworthy level so low? Because people have watched her over decades lie about everything, including, I gasped for air. I had no idea he cheated on me with Monica Lewinsky. Nobody buys that. And for everybody to pretend they do is amazing.
Yeah, look,
John,
a couple.
Yeah, go ahead.
Look, just a couple things here. You know, PolitiFact's ranking of the lies by respective candidates is as close as we're going to get to an objective tallying of the sheer sum and total. We know that Donald Trump is, at the end of the day, a hype man. He admits freely. He engages in hyperbole. The problem is that crosses into demagoguery in a political context. Hillary Clinton has problems with honesty and trustworthiness. We know that from polls, in part because for 25 years she's been demonized by partisan media. And so it comes back to partisan media and the role it plays. It is the job of journalists to insist on a fact-based debate. It is increasingly, we are recognizing that it is also our job to call out lies and to call them lies and not default to this on the one hand and the other moral relativism. And those of you on the side of partisan media who say that, the implicit bias of mainstream media over the years can only be corrected by explicit bias. Well, you carried the day for a while, but now people are hip to your tricks. And it's a fundamental problem that's undercutting trust in media, journalism, and democracy writ large.
Nobody buys this whole pretense that somehow John Avlon and the Daily Beast are the soul of objective media coverage when you sat in the studio and you all made fun of Dick Cheney's heart trouble and how you wouldn't take his heart in a transplant.
Go back and look at your own clip, because while you're exquisitely sensitive about things when they're perceived slights, you'll see actually I defended Dick Cheney in that particular clip you're referring to, which is ancient history, but I'm happy to engage in it. Look, the bottom line is that you guys have a real credibility problem, and there's a need for a place like you to call out whatever implicit or explicit bias exists on the left. But you sacrifice your real credibility because you're only going to focus on one side of the problem, and that perpetuates the polarization. We try to be nonpartisan but not neutral at the Daily Beast.
On Trump.
And what that means is that we will hit the left or the right as the facts indicate. We will report without fear or favor, and you have explicit favor in your donors and your ideological agenda from day one, and that's why your credibility fails.
Let me play ref here and say I want all media to exist. I want Newsbusters to exist and the Daily Beast. I just want people to know what they are and what they stand for. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. And John has written the perfect companion to this segment on CNNMoney.com, his essay, What News Needs to Do Now in these weeks ahead of the election. Check it out, CNNMoney.com.
The problem is that 140 characters or a comment to another journalist on the phone doesn't give people a clear picture, allies, adversaries, the American people, a clear picture of what you're trying to do. One thing it doesn't tell us, for instance, is that we're already undergoing an upgrade to our nuclear arsenal to the tune of billions of dollars.
David Drucker, I'll just read it for people who have missed his tweet. I'll just read it so everybody knows what we're talking about. The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes. How do you interpret that?
How do I interpret that? I have no idea how to interpret that. Let me tell you what it could mean. It could mean that we need to upgrade our nuclear arsenal and make it more modern. The infrastructure has had a huge problems and has been lagging behind. We know that from.
But we're in the middle of that. I mean, as David Swerlik just said, we're already doing
right.
That, yes?
Right, but I mean, you're asking me basically to shrink the president-elect, and I'm not inside of his head. I'm not sure if he's trying to send a message to Putin or to North Korea or to China about the fact that we're not going to back down and we will continue to use our nuclear arsenal as a deterrent. Doing so has worked very effectively over years in American history. It's one of the reasons we won the Cold War. We were able to outlast the Russians both militarily and financially because they could not keep up. So it could mean all of these things. The reason we're all in, sort of trying to figure this out is the president-elect has been on every side of this issue throughout the campaign and even up until now. At times he's talked about allowing other countries to have their own nuclear arsenals, countries that currently do not, and that we have as a matter of policy. Both Republicans and Democrats have always found it better for us to be in control of nuclear weapons and not even other democracies that we deal with. And now he's talked about wanting to get rid of nuclear weapons. Now he's talking about a buildup. This is the sort of thing that would be helpful for our allies and even domestically our policymakers to understand exactly what he's talking about. There could be positive aspects to this. There could be negative aspects to this. We just don't know.
And again, as this gets out that he said on the phone, let it be an arms race, we'll outmatch them at every pass. Let's wait until we hear from his people what the context was. Because again, sometimes even a president-elect or a president could speak one way to a friend on the phone and not mean it as a policy statement. But we don't know yet, so we'll have to learn more about that. Here's one that's more clear, where you don't have to shrink his head, as you say, David, but you can go on facts. He sent a couple of tweets about his son and his son's charitable efforts in the context of what was just revealed as, a potential sham around the inauguration. My wonderful son, Eric, will no longer be allowed to raise money for children with cancer because of a possible conflict of interest with my presidency. Isn't this a ridiculous shame? He loves these kids, has raised millions of dollars for them, and now must stop. Wrong answer. Now, Mr. Swerdlick, this is untrue on its face. One, there is no possible conflict of interest. There are real conflicts of interest. And what was revealed by the Center for Public Integrity about this invitation saying $500,000 to hunt with the boys, $1 million to get to meet the president, is not about raising money for kids. It was supposed to go to conservation charities, according to the invitation. What do you make of these tweets? Defending the son, of course, but this way.
Right. So it's understandable that Trump is going to sort of lash back at the criticism that these conflicts of interest exist and that the press is following up on these. I think here's the bigger picture challenge for the Trump transition, the administration, and the Trump kids. When Donald Trump was campaigning for president, he put out there a very basic idea that I think most people can go along with. He was going to run the country. His kids were going to run the Trump organization. There was going to be separation. But when you have these instances where the Eric Trump Foundation is raising money, say, for instance, auctioning off a coffee with Ivanka Trump, or some of the other instances that you pointed out, this blurs the lines. As you said, there are not, just sort of pretend conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest are real, and this presents a problem for them, and they're now trying to push back.
You can raise money for kids all day. It's a beautiful thing to do. You just don't want to do it by selling access to the president.
David Drucker, very quick thought.
Yeah, look, this is one of my favorite games. What if Clinton did it? This was the argument that the Clinton Foundation and their supporters made, and Trump, of course, was quick to point out and call it pay to play. It's all a sham, and everybody knows that Trump's kids are not just his kids. They're grown adults, number one. Number two, they're among his key advisors, his closest advisors. People are going to give to anything they do because they want access to the president, and to try and sell it as otherwise is just disingenuous. His supporters will buy it. It just simply isn't true.
David Swerdlick, David Drucker, thank you very much. All right, coming up, we are monitoring two big breaking stories. The suspected Christmas market terrorist has been killed in a shootout in Milan. We'll tell you what happened and how police finally zeroed in on him. Then we're also watching this apparent plane hijacking, a plane leaving Malta. No, it's been diverted to Malta, I should say.
It was a Libyan flight, internal to Libya, was diverted to Malta by hijackers.
On the tarmac in Malta, we'll tell you what we know about what's happening on that plane next.